Today, we're honored to have an incredibly deep and rich woman to kick off our season. Dr. Rita Kessen has written a book entitled Strong Voices. She's right over there, which is a history of women's choruses and includes a history of gala choruses. The Gay and Lesbian Association of Choruses produces a festival at which Sage singers will be attending Minneapolis in 10 months. We hope to be the very first senior chorus to perform at this amazing, unlike anything you have ever experienced festival. And we're all so excited. So, our guest today, Rita Kessen, is a lifelong activist for social justice issues. She co-founded the first Maine chapter of PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, having a lesbian daughter herself. And she also co-founded a chapter of GLSEN, that's Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. And as a faculty member at the University of Southern Maine, she taught a variety of courses, focusing very much on her multiple good causes. In 1996, she published The Last Closet, The Real Lives of Lesbian and Gay Teachers. And in 2002, another book entitled Getting Ready for Benjamin, Preparing Teachers for Sexual Diversity in the Classroom. Singing with Portland's Women in Harmony, that's the name of that chorus, led her eventually to her 10-year journey of writing this book, Strong Voices. And now she sings with the Silvertones, which is a 100-member senior chorus in Fort Collins. And they happen to have a concert coming up this Thursday. And we have some flyers, if any of you would be interested in going to that concert. And they also have a website. You would just Google Silvertones, right? So you can pick one of these up if that fits for you. She's married to her spouse, Norm Rasulis, for nearly 30 years, and they both enjoy 5 grandchildren. So, here's Rita.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you, Carol, and thank you, everybody who helped bring me here, and Kevin. This is just wonderful to be here. I've been instructed not to touch this. So I'm being really careful not to touch it. It's great to be here, and as Judith was doing that little intro, I was reminded that Benjamin, whose mom's, my daughter is one of his moms, and I wrote that book thinking about training teachers, teacher education, for teachers who will encounter LGBT families of whatever stripe. This was back more than 10 years ago. And Benjamin was a baby, and he's now starting his second year at Harvard. Oh my gosh. He's our oldest grandchild. So I want to tell you a little bit about me and how I came to write this book. So as was mentioned, I sang with Women in Harmony, which is a women's chorus in Portland, Maine. We think of Portland, Oregon as the other Portland. And when I retired, they said, well, you have all the time in the world now that you're retired. You folks all, I'm sure, know that syndrome. And asked me to be publicity chair, which I did. And as publicity chair, I started doing little press releases and articles for local media outlets. This was before the internet got huge. I retired in 2005, but it was a lot of little, local print media, whatever. And so in doing that, I started interviewing some of the women in my chorus, and I had already done interviews for my first book and my second book, and it's kind of a mode of writing and listening that I really love. I love to hear what people say about what matters to them. And so that kind of grew. And at the same time, my husband and I moved to Portland, Maine in 1991. And there was a small group of, we both have lesbian daughters. We met in 1986 and discovered we both have lesbian daughters named Michelle. So what better reason to get married, right? Anyway, there was a small group of parents who were, PFLAG was just getting going nationally. There was a small group of parents who would meet in someone's home with their pastor. He was the kind of safe facilitator. And they were very, very closeted. Some of them were still grieving because they thought their kids, their daughters would never get married and have kids. Little did they know that a lot of them would. But anyway, there was a lot of distress. There was a lot of fear in that group. And I had taught women's studies, and Norm had been involved. We're both retired academics. He had been involved in gender studies and men and masculinity. So we both known gay and lesbian people, and loved our lesbian daughters. So I told this group that there was an organization, a national organization called PFLAG that had all kinds of resources. And they wouldn't have to do anything, they wouldn't have to come out, they wouldn't have to be visible, but I'd be happy to be the representative if we became a chapter. And they said, sure, as long as we don't have to do anything or be visible. Some of them were visible. So we did become a chapter, and that was the first chapter in Maine. Now there are several others, and I mean, that was so long ago. Things have changed so much. PFLAG in Portland now marches in Pride Parade and testifies and all of that. And because I was teaching, I also became involved with other lesbian and gay teachers, and that's how my first book got started, The Last Closet. And GLSEN was just getting going, the gay lesbian, what is now the Gay Lesbian and Straight Education Network. It started in Massachusetts and was spreading around. And several lesbian teachers, one was very closeted at that time, one was out, and I started a GLSEN chapter in Maine also, which again is now very, very active. And the other thing I did in my LGBT activism was in 1992, there was a ballot initiative to add sexual orientation to the Portland, Maine Human Rights Ordinance. And this was 1992. And there was a big campaign to defeat it, and so I became one of the spokespeople. We had 2 out gay people as spokespeople and 2 straight people as 2 allies as spokespeople for that. And that was a great learning experience. We did win. So that was wonderful. In 2013, my husband and I moved to Colorado. We have 5 grandchildren, as Judith mentioned, and 3 of them live in Colorado. So, and one is, Benjamin's already in college, and the other one, Conrad, is in Michigan. In fact, his moms just celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary. They had a destination wedding in Hawaii 5 years ago, and that was very special. Little Conrad was the best man. Anyway, but we didn't want to move to Michigan because we had already encountered enough bad weather in Maine. So we ended up in Colorado, and since coming here, I spend a lot of time with the 3 Colorado grandchildren. I volunteer at my youngest granddaughter's school in Longmont, Burlington Elementary School, wonderful elementary school, I love it. And so, as Judith mentioned, I've been working on this book for a very long time, but it finally has come to fruition. And I'm going to read you a little bit about how I got interested in it, and then a couple of what I would think of as the highlights. This book came out of my belief in music and singing together to create community and make change in the world. And you're all here, so you already know that, right? I was just curious, how many of you have sung in other choruses? Have any of you sung? Yeah. So you know what it's like. Do you know that when you sing in chorus, your heartbeats synchronize? Some of you may already know that. When you sing with other people, isn't that amazing? And there are a lot of other, I do have a little bit in the introduction about other things about the physical, emotional, and social benefits of singing, but you've probably all experienced that. So I'm going to start with the beginning of the book. about why I chose to learn more about and write about feminist choruses. All choral singers, whether they are high school students, community singers, or the Sweet Adelines, share the physical and social bonds of making music together. Similarly, political activists working toward a common goal share a dedication to their cause, from worker solidarity to lesbian and gay visibility. Women's groups, from quilters to soccer teams, work together for a common purpose and often create relationships that radiate into the rest of their lives. But feminist choruses bring all these elements together to create something new. Estelle Phillips, a longtime singer with the Charlottesville Women's Choir, spoke for many when she said, "There is something different, the sense of joy that comes from singing the music and hearing the music, and the group effort in working through problems that, say, my tennis group doesn't involve and my book group doesn't involve." 30 years ago, women's choruses were among the few places where lesbians felt free to be themselves. In the words of one singer who had just come out in her school district, "the place to breathe." And I have to pause here because the person who said that, her name is Betsy Parsons, and she was the mother of Glisten, and she's one of the co-founders. She's currently in rehab, experiencing a lot of medical challenges, and I just have to get her name out here. She's done amazing things, especially for youth in Maine. Though LGBT people have become more visible in American society, women continue to find their authentic voices in feminist choruses. Women whose high school chorus directors told them to just mouth the words. Any of you fit that category? No, good. But many people have said that. Discover that they can sing. Survivors of emotional or physical abuse, many of whom had literally lost their voices, find the courage to speak and to sing. Many women describe their experience in spiritual terms. They speak of the connection to the other singers and to the chorus as a whole, to the audience and to the divine, however they choose to name or define it. Along with the sense of connection, they often describe feelings of deep and quiet joy, peace and joy, happiness and wholeness. The story of women's choruses is also a story of how a coalition of singers that began as a mostly separatist musical home for the lesbian community grew into an inclusive network welcoming women of all sexual and gender orientations and singing for justice in the wider world. As identity politics yielded to coalition building, and as essentialism gave way to intersectionality, the concept of overlapping biological, social, and cultural identities, women's choruses have become a vital part of the LGBT choral movement, with a mission expressed in the words of Gary Miller, founding director of the New York City Gay Men's Chorus. "If you want to sing, join a chorus. If you want to change the world, join a gay chorus." Great quote. One of the people that I profile in this book is a woman named Kathy Roma. Some of you may know her or know of her. She actually is a former president, director of Gala. She has now retired. There's a lot about her early. She founded one of the first women's choruses in Philadelphia and then moved to Cincinnati where she founded Muse. And Muse is one of the choruses people turn to. You'll hear them at Gala if you go. One of the choruses people turn to when they're trying to make their chorus more diverse, especially more racially diverse. I have a lot about race and racism, not in our choruses, but racial identity in this book. I don't have time to read all of that, but it's been one of the ongoing challenges of the women's chorus movement, as it's been for all of us. Anyway, so Kathy had started a chorus in Philadelphia, and then she moved to Cincinnati, and she partnered, well, before I get to the part about race, I want to read you this quotation about how Sister Singers, which is our umbrella organization of the women's chorus movement, how Sister Singers got started. It really started at the Michigan Women's Festival. The late, great Rest in Power, Michigan Women's Festival, and the National Women's Music Festival, which is still going. So I just wanted to read you a little quote from Kathy, which, because we're all in the same cohort, more or less, you'll, I think, relate to this. In the pre-internet 1970s and 1980s, music festivals were enclaves where chorus members and directors from far-flung places could meet one another for the first time. Many years later, Kathy Roman recalled those times, and this is Kathy speaking. Imagine the year is 1972. There are no cell phones, no internet, no voicemail or answering machines, yet a network of women across the nation hooked up via sheer will. Women wanting to sing their lives, women writing lyrics, expressing the emotion and experience of their everyday lives, women performing for one another, producing concerts, doing all skilled and technical jobs, including light and sound, recording, learning to play instruments usually considered unfeminine, traps, trumpet, bass, electric guitar, saxophone, etc., all coalesced around this thing called women's music. And at Michigan, I'm going to give you just a little bit about how the network actually started. It's so evocative of those days. If Kathy Roman was the mother of the women's chorus movement, Linda Ray, whose nickname was Echo, and Linda Small could be considered the midwives of the network that became its home. Echo was a member of the Kansas City Women's Chorus, and Linda Small of the St. Louis Women's Chorus, two of the early Midwestern choruses that had already begun exchanging songs when they met up at the Michigan Women's Music Festival in 1980. Earlier that summer, singers in a workshop at the National Women's Music Festival had drawn up a list of names and addresses that they hoped would become the genesis of a women's chorus network. And Marty Keener, a member of Miss Saftman's Ladies Choir, which was the tongue-in-cheek name for their chorus, in Champaign-Urbana, had sent out a mailing with a list of 15 courses. Keener addressed her letter to Sister Singers and added, "I obviously like that appellation. How about calling our network the Sister Singers Network?" That's how we got our name. 2 months later, choral singers at the Michigan Women's Music Festival held a meeting where they drew up plans for a combined concert and music sharing initiative. Following the meeting, singers who had attended the National Women's Music Festival, which still goes on, circulated a list they had compiled and invited Michigan attendees to add their names. Someone said, "Well, we started this thing at National, here's the list," Echo recalled many years later. Linda and I looked at each other and said, "This is never going to get off the ground unless someone takes this list and does something with it." We had no way to duplicate it there because that was a rural setting, so we drug it home. That fall, Echo and Linda sent out an expanded chorus list, a plan for sharing music, and a proposal for Sister Singers' choral performance at the 1981 National Women's Music Festival. We said, "We need a logo or something, or they won't think it's real," as if it were, Echo recalled. So some people in our choir came up with a logo, put it on a letterhead, made a bunch of copies, typed up a letter, typed up a thing, and said, "Send it out." The new logo featured an image of a treble clef combined with the bottom cross of the traditional women's sign, superimposed on a curved staff line meant to suggest a rainbow. Enclosed with the letter was a directory based on the summer's list and including contact information for 15 women's choruses. The majority were from the Midwest, though California and Washington, D.C. were also represented. Sister Singers would eventually expand to other regions of the country and to both coasts, but the network retains a strong Midwestern presence to this day. And in the center of this book, by the way, a lot of the graphics in this book come from the Sophia Smith collection at Smith College, which is an archive of women's history of all kinds. And most of the Sister Singers archive is there. And there's a yellow sheet of paper where they all signed their names at that festival, which I have a copy of in here, which was very powerful for me to see that back in 1980. So back to Kathy Roma, because I think this is a kind of typical Kathy story. The lesbian feminist music festivals and choruses were in the forefront of deconstructing disability. Building racial diversity proved more challenging. Like the mainstream women's movement and the women's music movement from which they sprang, early women's choruses were overwhelmingly white. Building choral partnerships across lines of race and ethnicity proved far more complicated and painful than many women anticipated. Nevertheless, identity conflicts and struggles over racism did not tear the network apart, as happened in so many other lesbian feminist groups in the 70s and 80s. One reason was that the network continued to nurture partnerships with singers like Issei Barnwell and Bernice Johnson Reagan, founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock, which you may know about. Coalition builders who mentored sister singers with honesty and love. In 1990, a meeting with Reagan inspired director Catherine Roma to begin a relationship that would help make Muse, her chorus, the most racially diverse chorus in the network and would inspire network choruses for years to come. Reagan encouraged Roma to go beyond repertoire and address the racial and ethnic makeup of the chorus itself. One of the things she said, that I quote somewhere in the book, is that even if your chorus is all white, if I can see myself reflected, if I can hear myself, that means something to me. But now she said to Kathy, that's all very well, but you got to do more. By 1990, Roma was ready to put a commitment into action. Muse had decided to keep its membership at 48. We didn't want to go above 48 because we wanted to be a community. We want to know each other and be involved in each other's lives. So we started talking about, well, how do we change ourselves? How do we attract more women of color? How do we reach out? How do we make that change? Since the number of singers was down to 39 at that time, some members suggested that the chorus reserve 7 slots for women of color. Quote, some people were very uncomfortable saying that's a quota system, you can't do that. And we talked about it. How do we change unless we make space? So we figured out how we were going to reach out to different communities, different organizations. The decision to allot specific slots to women of color continued to generate controversy. There were some people who didn't want us to do that. We called Angie Danoff, who has sung with the chorus since its founding. I thought it made the most sense. We would never have filled them if we just got to the end of the auditions and said, well, we didn't have 7 people of color, so we've got to fill it with someone. And so Kathy reached out. She had connections in the African-American community in Cincinnati. She had done some work with a pastor who was a leader in several African-American churches, and she got stuff in newspapers. And they put together a program for Martin Luther King Day. So she was very proactive. Helping Muse become more diverse did not end with merely bringing in more African-American members. It meant ensuring that the new members would feel at home in this mostly white chorus. Kathy was a good caretaker, Angie Danoff explained. There's a sort of place where you go over the edge, and now you've got enough African-Americans to make them feel like they can stay. But you have to do caretaking and keep them in, especially in the beginning when you don't have very many people. Asked what you meant by caretaking, Angie went on to explain. Well, if the policy per se says you can't miss 3 rehearsals or you can't be late, and someone in the choir is having trouble with their lives, Kathy might let an African-American woman who was just scraping by to make a living miss rehearsals or be late to rehearsal as long as they can do the singing when we needed them. It pissed some people off. It's not exactly perfectly right if you were strictly going by the rules, but that's what I mean by caretaking. Attracting more African-American singers broadened Muse's singing style as well as its membership. Roma speculated that the presence of African-American voices encouraged chorus members who loved to sing in their lower range. She said, nobody talks about the mature woman's voice. That's us. Voice teachers are worried that people are going to hurt their voices and stuff like that. But the experience of African-American women is to use the full range of their voice and just let it go. And an early part of the book that I don't have time to read from right now, there's a whole historical section at the beginning, and it's about a chorus that Antonio Vivaldi directed at an ospedale in Venice, which was a place for orphans, basically. That's what they told me not to do. That's what they said not to do. So now I'm out of... Sure? It's because I talk with my hands. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me?
It does that even when you don't touch it, so yeah, it's not you.
Sorry. Are we on? We're not. Sorry. to just turn it all off? Can everybody hear me in the back? No.
I'll get you back on. It's okay. Every week, it's okay.
So this is happened before, huh?
Well, the one.
All right, I'm going to keep talking. I hope people can hear me. Is that working?
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
I was warned, but
Really, it does that even when you don't touch the
my husband says it's a Jewish thing, but I think it's a New York thing.
It is on? Okay.
Are we good? No. Are we good now? Yeah. All right, thank you. Thanks for your indulgence. Where was I?
Antonio Vivaldi at the.
Oh, right. So the girls, thank you. The girls' chorus in the Ospedale had bass singers. Some of the music is for basses, and I tell more about that in the book. But it's very interesting. And there's a women's chorus in Oxford, England, that went to. They sing the music of Vivaldi, and they went to Venice to the exact place. And one of the women in that chorus sings bass, and she's had some interesting things to say. Okay. I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm just going to highlight a couple more things. One is, and I know you've all lived through this. Women's choruses were pretty separate for the early part of their lives. The lesbian and gay communities were pretty separate. And what brought them together was, and their cultures were very different. Tim Seelig, who now directs the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, he's directed a lot of different choruses, he agreed about the many differences between the culture of women's and men's choruses, especially in the early days. Seelig noted that while women's choruses were often focused on issues of specific concern to women, such as violence against women and reproductive rights, gay men's choruses were, quote, most often about being gay and singing, which I think was pretty true. All of that changed in 1981 when the New York Times reported that doctors had diagnosed 41 cases of a rare and often rapidly fatal form of cancer among homosexual men in the New York and San Francisco Bay areas. During the next 10 years, over 150,000 Americans, more than half of them gay men, would die of AIDS, more than twice as many people as died in the Vietnam War. So I'm going to skip a little of this. The AIDS epidemic changed the culture of the gay male community and of gay men's choruses from pure celebration to survival and support. And in addition, meanwhile, lesbian separatists, including those in women's choruses, watched as the medical establishment and the government turned their backs on the suffering of gay men and recognized the common enemy in the societal homophobia that stigmatized their gay brothers afflicted with a disease. Among the lesbian choruses responding to the epidemic was Heart Song in Houston, Texas, a chorus that had hosted the 1991 Sister Singers Festival. Heart Song had begun as an informal group of friends who regularly sang at an AIDS hospice and at the AIDS wing of a local hospital. And several founders were nurses who witnessed the physical and emotional ravages of the disease firsthand. I was an ICU nurse when all this started, one singer recalled. I remember our first patient that came and was in isolation. Nobody wanted to touch him. One night he was having a really hard time and was crying. And his parents were fundamentalists. So I crawled in bed with him, just held him. I sang to him. I sang lullabies to him, in fact. The music just broke the spell of the awfulness and the grief. Another chorus member who lived through those days said, I think that the fact that Heart Song started at the same time that the AIDS epidemic was really heavy in the city, that in some way had a community feeling. It was the lesbians that took care of the gay men that were dying then. Because there was such strife and hatefulness against the gay community then, as well as, we were kind of in it together. There are a number of other examples of choruses coming together at that time. And I'm skipping over a lot of history of the last 10 or 15 years, but if you think about all the struggles and the victories and the challenges that the LGBT community has faced, women's choruses and gay and lesbian choruses, men's choruses and mixed LGBT choruses have been in the forefront of all of them. The marriage, struggle for marriage equality, legal equality, you name it, and we've been there. There's another section in the book describing Gala's more recent, and a lot of women's choruses now belong to Gala, by the way. So some don't, but many do. There's also a section describing Gala's mentoring of trans choruses. We have one in Boulder, right? Phoenix? And youth choruses. And they are really, the youth choruses just blow my mind. At the last Gala Festival, which was in Denver, did anybody here attend that? Those young people singing just blew me away. It was very, very moving and inspiring, and they're wonderful. But as I said, I want to leave some time for questions. I'm just going to conclude the way the book concludes with the last election and how choruses are responding to that. Shortly after the 2016 election, a post that seemed to resonate with women's choruses all over the country began making the rounds on the internet. The post originated with Amy Van Ostall, a Denver woman who had participated in the January 21st March for Women's Lives. Van Ostall wrote, "This morning I have been pondering a nearly forgotten lesson I learned in high school music. Sometimes in band or choir, music requires players or singers to hold a note longer than they can actually hold a note. In those cases, we were taught to mindfully stagger when we took a breath so the sound appeared uninterrupted. Let's remember music. Together we can sustain a very long, beautiful song for a very, very long time. You don't have to do it all, but you must add your voice to the song." On January 21st, 2017, the day after the presidential inauguration, millions of women, men, and children from every continent on the planet participated in the Women's March, the largest single-day protest in U.S. history. Women's choruses joined the marches in their home cities. Probably a lot of you were you guys in Denver that day? I was. It was very special. Some gave impromptu performances, but in other places the crowds were so big that singers weren't able to find one another. Those who were unable to attend the march poured over Facebook posts and photo essays in newspapers and magazines. One of those who experienced the march for newspaper photos was Ruth Huber, co-artistic director of the Rainbow Women's Chorus of San Jose, California. The result was a new composition inspired by those images. Huber's description of how she came to write songs provides an apt to this history of women's choruses. This is what she said. "The Women's March of January 21st, 2017 was a historic, unprecedented outpouring of nasty women and their friends, united in protest and burgeoning hope for the future. Sparked by a 5-word Facebook post, I think we should march. Thousands of activists, movement leaders, and ordinary people turned out in all 50 states and around the world. Because Rainbow Women's Chorus had our 20-year anniversary concert that day, I was unable to attend local events, but a friend sent me a link to a photo essay from the New York Times. I spent about 30 minutes perusing images of impassioned women and men, some in pink hats, all carrying an array of cardboard signs. I wrote down the messages that leapt out at me, and their voices began to sing, resulting in signs, voices from the Women's March. There were a few favorites that I had to leave out. From a boat in Antarctica, penguins for peace, and seals for science. And finally, a nation is not defeated till the hearts of women are on the ground. In these dark times, singing together keeps my heart aloft." And that's Ruth, and that's actually how I end the book. So we still have a little time, and again, I apologize for disobeying the rule, but I'm happy to, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes?
So you've gotten to study and listen to and talk to people from a lot of different courses. Do you have any favorite songs that you've heard in a process.
Any favorite?
Any favorite songs from the choruses that you sang?
Oh,
Yeah.
actually, my favorite songs come from Women in Harmony. The ones that I sang. One of the songs that we've done a number of times was Holly Near, Change of Heart. I don't know if you know that.
Yep.
I listen to that a lot. I would have to say, but that's close to the top of my list. It's kind of says to me what it's all about. Yeah. Great question. Anybody else? Comments? Questions? Your comments are welcome. I'm better at writing than I am at technology. Anything else? Anybody's? Yeah.
Tell us about Silvertones in Fort Collins.
Oh, the Silvertones. Thank you for reminding me. The Silvertones is an outreach of the Larimer Chorale. And the Larimer Chorale is I think they just celebrated their 40-something anniversary concert choir. Auditioned very, I didn't make the audition, very, very good concert choir in Fort Collins. They travel to Europe, they do 3 concerts a year, they're wonderful. And the director, Mike Kruger, I think partly as his mother was getting older, decided that he wanted to do something to support the social interactions of seniors. And so he and a woman named Wendy White co-founded this senior chorus, and when they first started it, and I do have an interview with Wendy in there where she talks about this, they thought it would be, there is a senior chorus in Northampton called Young at Heart. I don't know if any of you have heard of them. There's a movie about them. And they do like rock songs, and but he's a classically trained conductor. He wanted the Silvertones to do something a little more challenging. So I think we're about 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old now. We're a non-audition choir, we have 100 members, and we sing 3 concerts a year. Mike calls them informances because he doesn't want people to have performance anxiety, so he calls them informances. And every concert will have a few really easy things that we sing in unison, and 1 or 2 really challenging pieces. This concert coming up on Thursday, we're doing a medley of John Denver songs, and you wouldn't think singing John Denver would be that challenging, but the rhythms in these songs are very challenging. And I love singing with them. I've made some friends through the Silvertones, and we're lucky that they're there. So if you're interested, you can ask me more during the book signing. Our concert is Thursday. There's posters somewhere.
Right here.
Yeah. Yeah, Judith has posters. And I forgot to put, tickets are available at the door. I think there's a little more expensive at the door, but you can get them online. And I forgot to put the web address, but if you Google Silvertones Fort Collins, you'll get to our website. Thanks for reminding me of that.
And just for your information, there are 3 other books that Rita has part in or all of, that I put them up here on this.
Yeah. Anybody have any other questions?
Do you have any advice for us? We're less than a year old now.
Keep singing. Keep singing. Other advice. I think one of the things that Mike does to keep our Silvertones going is he gives us lots of verbal support. Most of our rehearsals have maybe a 5 or 10 minute little, I won't even call it lecture, but explanation about some aspect of music theory or singing. And you don't have to read music to understand it. But I just think having a strong leader, which you do, is really important. Tell your friends about it, what you're doing, get out there, and come to our concert and meet. Actually, Mike has been on leave this summer. Our director this summer is Marvin Crawford, who is a member of the Larimer Chorale and directs many church choirs in Fort Collins, and is wonderful. And I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you. And if you can't come to the concert, I can put you in touch with him and with Mike. Mike lives in Denver. Yeah, I'm not sure where, but I know he comes up from Denver. Yeah, I think it's wonderful that you're doing it. I think it's wonderful that you're going to Gala. I think that's another really, that will be another really helpful event in the life of your chorus. You'll connect nationally and you'll get support and people will love you. Really. Have any other questions or comments?